Thanks for downloading from BBC Radio 4. This is The Public Philosopher USA edition. In the second of two programmes, Professor Michael Sandel ends his travels by challenging a public audience at Harvard, his home university, to consider a moral question at the heart of next week's presidential election. Who built it? Is the American dream of individual success a myth?
Hello and welcome to Harvard University. My name is Michael Sandel. Very soon, Americans will choose a president. Barack Obama and his challenger Mitt Romney seem to agree on one thing at least. This election offers a fundamental choice between two different visions of the role of government and of America's future. I'd like to invite those of you gathered here, students and members of the public, and our radio audience on the BBC, to listen to two contrasting statements about the meaning of individual success and about who owes what to whom.
If you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. There was a great teacher somewhere in your life. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that we have that allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. If you got a business, that you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
I know that there are some people who believe that if you simply take from some and give to others, that we'll all be better off. It's known as redistribution. It's never been a characteristic of America. The president saying, yes, he believes in redistribution. I don't. This idea of redistribution follows from the idea that if you have a business, you didn't build it. Someone else did that. It's the same concept that, see, government is responsible for everything that's going on here, and therefore government can take and give as it chooses. It's an entirely foreign concept that will not work, that has not worked, that has never worked anywhere in the world.
Now, the first statement by President Obama was widely viewed as a gaffe. Republicans have mocked the notion that the successful owe their success to somebody else or to the government. The second statement by Mitt Romney came on the heels of a gaffe of his own, a secretly recorded video showing him telling wealthy donors that 47% of Americans pay no income tax, are dependent on the government, believe that they are victims, and believe that they are entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. These two so-called gaffes actually represent a rare moment in this campaign when the two candidates were caught expressing thoughts that verge on big questions of political philosophy. What is a fair society? Who is entitled to what? And what is the moral significance of individual success in a market economy? Much of the debate in this campaign revolves around taxes and health care. President Obama favors higher taxes on the wealthy. Governor Romney favors tax cuts for everyone, including the most affluent. And then there is the recently enacted health care reform, commonly called Obamacare. Romney wants to repeal it. Obama wants to keep it. Let's begin with health care. Let's put aside the complex details of the reform and focus on a question of principle, a question about entitlement. Consider the following statement. Every American is entitled to decent health care regardless of his or her ability to pay. Raise your hand if you agree with that statement. And how many disagree with that statement? All right, here at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, the majority agree with that statement. A minority disagree. Let's begin with those who disagree about everyone being entitled to health care regardless of their ability to pay.
Hey there, my name's Aaron. I disagree with this because it implies if they're entitled to a service or a product that someone else is going to be providing that for them, and I'm one of the someone else's, And I don't feel that I or anyone else should be forced to have to pay for anyone else's services and products.
Aaron, you're one of the someone else's.
That's right.
And you don't want to be coerced, to pay for somebody else's health care.
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Corinne. Not only is it coercive to the people who are being forced to pay for this and being forced to provide these services, but it's also coercive on the people who are receiving these services. In a lot of places where you have universal medicine, there's often not a lot of options about what you're able to choose, and what you're able to choose is right for yourself.
Corinne, it's coercive to whom to tax people for health care? To the taxpayer.
Right. I support taxes that go to protecting people's rights. So protecting people's right to property, for example, as defined in the Declaration of Independence. So you support a police that protects people's right to own their property. It protects the protection of people. Those kinds of taxes I'm in favor of. But saying you're taking taxes to apply them to people for health care that they're necessarily not in favor of, in telling people how to have health care, telling people what kinds of health care they're allowed to have.
So here we have a position in the U.S., what is a familiar libertarian position, and Ron Paul, the libertarian candidate for the Republican nomination, articulated it. The libertarian position that taxation, in order to protect property rights, to protect people from force and coercion, to provide for national defense, perhaps, and the courts, is one thing, but taxation for the sake of redistribution or for the sake of providing health care to everyone, to provide for welfare, is a different matter, and it's wrong because it's coercive. Do I have it right?
Yes.
All right. Now, who would like to reply?
My name is Ruba. I'd like to go back to what someone said previously about the right. Healthcare is not a service or a product. It's a basic dignity, human right for everyone. And along with those rights come responsibilities. I like to live in a society where we have that responsibility for one another. I wouldn't want to live in a society where we throw our poor, sick people into the street because they can't afford it. And that's the type of society I expect my government to give me. So along with that right that I want to give everyone to have decent, basic, maybe let's call it basic, if not decent, a basic health care, I take on that responsibility of giving whatever contribution I have to give so that I can have my children raised in a society that is decent to all human beings.
And let me ask you, how do you answer the libertarian objection to what you've just said, that it might be a wonderful idea to provide health care to everyone, but doesn't it involve coercing people by taking their money, their resources, against their will? How do you answer the coercion argument?
You pay for what you get for. If I'm not paying anything, then I don't expect to live in a decent society. A decent society is one that's judged on how they treat their most vulnerable. I will pay to live there. So I don't feel coerced if I'm getting good value. I'm getting good value in that I'm in a stable, safe society where I can raise my kids as decent human beings. That, for me, is not coercion. I would gladly pay for that.
Who disagrees with Ruba? On the issue of coercion.
Hi, my name's Sean. I agree with a lot of what was just said, actually. I think it would be a terrible thing to live in a society that let people be destitute on the street, let the sick go unhelped. And I think most people in this room agree with that. And I think that's exactly why you don't need a government to do it. Everybody agrees that it would be horrible to do these things. Charitable organizations are designed to deal with these types of things. Religious institutions are designed to. Historically, fraternal societies have been able to do these things. There's no problem with helping people. There's no problem with providing aid to the poor. The problem is with the coercive mechanism used, where you take from people involuntarily through taxation, through government, to provide benefits to other people. As long as it's done voluntarily, these are very worthwhile, great goals.
And Sean, why is it a bad thing if it's a worthwhile goal for private charities? Why is it not also a worthwhile goal for collective state action, for people of a democracy to tax themselves to advance those worthy goals?
There's nothing wrong with people donating to the government. The very fact that we have taxation is proof it's not a donation, because it's forced. If the government is willing to accept charitable donations, but you don't give it there, if in fact it's not a very effective way to do it, you'd be better off giving it to American Red Cross, to giving it to Catholic hospitals, to giving it to other institutions that could do it more effectively and more efficiently. This is why people don't donate to the federal government. They donate it to actual institutions that are much better able to handle poor.
All right, so it would be a good thing for private charity to help people with their health care needs, but the government should not coerce people, should not coerce taxpayers to provide for this end. What do you say?
My name is Sharu, and I would say that a society that allows the majority of the poor to go without basic necessities would in fact be coercive, because it would be inducing poverty.
So there's coercion in allowing poverty and desperate economic necessity to persist. There's coercion in that. In what sense are they coerced?
I would say that this stems from a lack of equal opportunity, because I believe that when we talk about the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is only in an equal society. And if we aren't all born into equal means and equal opportunity, then there will be no pursuit of happiness for some.
Yes, what do you say?
My name is John. I just feel people just too easily bind to this argument that the people who get entitlements are the people who don't work. That you have so many injustices that have accumulated over the years. Redistribution makes sense. I'm just rambling.
You're passionate, it sounds.
I do think there is a lot of coercion in the society, even just basically with property rights. If we are enforcing that, we should give back to people.
So you say you agree with the suggestion earlier that there is coercion built into society, and people who are sick and can't get health care are effectively coerced. The people who are poor and can't send their children to get an education are coerced. They're not living free lives. Is that what you're suggesting, John?
If they are trapped in poverty, if they cannot find a way out, if you're not giving them the opportunity to educate themselves, if you're not giving them the chance to be, because sickness is random. It can happen to anyone. You can do dumb things, you can increase the risks, but sickness is random. And if it can happen to anyone, when it happens to the poor, and when you don't give them the chance to get decent medical treatment, you essentially give them a disadvantage. And so you coerce them into staying down and just keeping them down.
Keeping them down, and therefore people who are ill and can't get health care lack the opportunity to rise. And what's interesting here is that on both sides of this argument about health care, and for that matter, about the welfare state, the value being appealed to, as I hear the discussion, is the same value, freedom as against coercion. There's a disagreement about what counts as coercion. Voices that argue against an entitlement to health care say that taxing people to pay for other people's health care is coercing them. The defenders of a right to health care also invoke the freedom coercion idea, and they say people who lack the basic necessities of life, including health care, are not truly free, but are, in effect, coerced. I want to see if there are any other arguments in favor of a right to health care that does not rely on the idea of freedom or its opposite, coercion. Yes?
My name is Ben. In the United States, many of us believe that public education, especially for children, is a very important foundation for a thriving democracy, that one cannot effectively participate in democracy without an adequate education. I would extend that and say without an adequate healthcare system, our democracy cannot thrive. I think that there's also a national security basis for that. In an age of being interconnected in a global world, in an age of pandemics and other mass diseases that affect public health, we cannot allow people to go untreated. If one person is suffering, not only is that an injustice for that individual, but it also endangers the general health of a society and the global well-being.
Let me ask you about your argument from democracy. Why does democracy require that everyone in the society be provided health care and education?
So democracy, one of the assumptions that I think the founding fathers in the United States discussed, Thomas Jefferson and so forth, argued that we need informed knowledgeable people. If we have people that are misinformed or uninformed, that are participating in a deliberative decision-making process, the deliberations will not be informative. So we have to have a basis of common standards. People have to understand that 2 + 2 = 4, etc. And I would argue that if you're not adequately healthy, you cannot engage in that deliberative process. If you're too sick to participate in a political process, democracy suffers.
Thank you. Yes.
I think people have mentioned the notion of being coerced into giving their money to somebody else. And I think that notion kind of goes against a very kind of core value in the American culture of citizenship. It's not somebody else who's receiving your money. It's a fellow citizen of America who's receiving your money.
All right, let me ask you a question. And tell me your name.
Alex?
Alex. Because you've heard there are critics here of this idea.
So I've heard, yeah.
Why should we, and by we I assume you mean the citizens of a country, why should we not regard our fellow citizens as somebody else, but instead as people for whom we're responsible?
Well, I think it goes back to the Declaration of Independence and that notion of forming a more perfect union, which is capable of ensuring the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of all of those who are a member of the union.
Well, let's put aside the Declaration of Independence. The language of forming a more perfect union actually is from the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. So, Alex, you've introduced the idea of forming a more perfect union where we don't regard our fellow citizens as somebody else, but as part of us. Is that the idea?
Correct. And I think people might underestimate how dependent we're all on each other.
And what do you do, Alex, if people say, I don't feel as though I'm connected in some deep way to people who live 2,000 miles away from me, whom I've never met, even though they are fellow Americans? What would you say to them?
I would say they underestimate their dependency on the welfare of each and every citizen in this country in order to, sustain their own personal rights. I think there's more mutual dependency than they might think.
What do you say?
My name is Skylar. I think you can even be more selfish about it if you need to be. It's not about feeling some sort of kinship with the people around you. Very simply, by providing this care, it will increase your own utility and help you to live a healthier existence.
All right, so that's an argument which doesn't require any strong moral claims about the common good or anything of the kind. It's a practical argument. It's a public health argument that costs will be lower and the public health will be higher if everybody's covered. Are you happy with that, Alex?
Well, I think sometimes when you justify it even on that selfish level, you get, bogged down in the numbers and the details. And I think the most solid argument that you could make for it is just truly in the ideological context of the common good. I think when you start estimating how much your own livelihood will be benefited by your specific, dollar donations to the common good, I think you'll be very hard-pressed to come up with, a solid piece of palpable gain, at least in this lifetime. But I think it just comes down to that ideological difference.
All right, so beyond the practical argument and the freedom argument, there's an argument in the name of the common good. It's the argument, suggested by Alex, that says taxing some to provide health care for other people is the wrong way of putting it. What really is involved is we're in this together. It's an argument that has to do with the idea of redistribution. We've heard the idea of redistribution debated between President Obama and Governor Romney. And let's see what people here think. Let's imagine some people who are very successful indeed, who've made a lot of money. Who would come to mind? Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, who founded Facebook, or maybe a famous sports star like Wayne Rooney. You haven't heard of Wayne Rooney? So that the BBC Radio 4 audience can hear how many people at Harvard have heard of Wayne Rooney, applaud if you have. And And those who haven't, you applaud now. All right. So it sounds to me like the majority haven't heard of him. Well, he's a famous football player in the UK. Makes huge amounts of money. But you can think instead, if you like, of Michael Jordan. All right. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg. They're very successful. They make a lot of money. Now, let's see what people think about the moral status of those earnings. How many would agree with the following statement? Those who succeed in a market economy are entitled to their earnings, and so it's wrong to redistribute a portion of their earnings to those who are less successful. How many agree with that? Raise your hands. And how many disagree? So the majority here at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government are in favor of redistribution, but a substantial minority are opposed. Yes, what would you say? Yes.
I'm Joyce. It seems like a good thing. I think there are a lot of social programs that start out with a good intention, but when you let the government do it, it really doesn't work. In fact, I worked for the government, and I was a warranted contracting officer. I know what goes on in a government office.
You think that government regulation is
And I don't want the government
oppressive.
Involved with health care. It's too important.
Let me ask you this,
And the amount of money
Let me ask you this, Joyce. The
spend.
Medicare is a program in the United States providing government-funded health care for people who have retired, people 65 and older. And this has been in place since the 1960s. Do you think government should get out of Medicare? Should the U.S. drop the Medicare program?
The Medicare program, I honestly just don't know about.
All right.
But to start having all the health care in the country and having people dependent more and more on the government, which really, really doesn't work. I think the intention might be good, but I think the results will be awful.
Thank you. I should mention that Obamacare is not a single-payer system. It doesn't create National Health Service, as in the UK. What it does is it leaves the private insurance companies in place, and everyone must carry health insurance. All right, now who would like to reply?
My name is Alexander. So I have 3 arguments to bring up for this.
3 arguments?
Yes.
You're well armed here.
So first I would go back to John Locke and his concept of government and say that when he defined government, he said that when people join a certain government and they stay within its jurisdiction, they voluntarily relinquish some of their right to property. And they allowed his government to do whatever he deems necessary with that part. So,
all right, well, let me stop you on that one, Alexander. You're bringing up the idea, John Locke's idea, of the social contract.
Yes.
And your idea is that since we all entered into a social contract, somehow or other, part of that contract was to let the government tax some, the successful, to help the less successful. Is that the idea?
Yes.
And Alexander, when did we enter into this social contract exactly?
Well, some people might bring the counter-argument that we were essentially forced by birth.
But wait. Before we get to counter-arguments, when did we enter? When did you enter into the social contract? Did you ever sign it?
Well, I didn't sign it, but I was born under a certain jurisdiction, and if I stay there, I tacitly agree with what it does, so with the government that operates that jurisdiction. So
whatever they do, you tacitly agree with? Does that mean you agree with all of the policies of the government?
Well, not necessarily with each and every single one of them, but if I agree with the majority of the policies, then I agree with the basic idea of the government. And
so, Alexander, you would say, though you didn't actually sign a social contract, the fact that you haven't picked up and left gives tacit agreement to the basic system of law that prevails in the country where you live?
Yes.
And that is enough to justify taxing the successful to help the less advantaged?
As long as some people make a certain sacrifice, and as long as they work as hard as they can, they deserve to get something in return. And if this involves taxation, then it is all right, because in addition to efficiency, we also have to ensure equitability, and taxation is one of these ways which government can use. A big portion of how we take advantage of our opportunities and equal opportunities is luck, and luck doesn't favor everyone. And if 2 people work as hard, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will reach the same point because of the luck factor. So the fact that two people have worked as hard as they can and one had the benefit of the luck doesn't mean that the other person should not get at least as much as he deserves for the hard work.
All right,
he put in.
so you're invoking luck, Alexander. So when we look at successful people like Bill Gates or Wayne Rooney or Michael Jordan, you're saying that part of their great success is due to luck, and therefore they don't deserve it to keep it all?
I mean, they had the benefit of the luck. The way everything happened in their case could have happened the same way in someone else's case if luck was on his side, but it didn't. So I do believe that people face trade-offs, and one trade-off for getting that much luck is probably giving a little bit of your income to society.
All right, thanks. So the idea of luck, yes. What do you think?
Hi, my name's Alana, and I just want to say that terming it redistribution for taxation purposes, it's a red herring term and frankly irrelevant. Warren Buffett, he drives on roads that are funded by the government. He pumps his car with gas that is funded by the government indirectly through government support for the oil industry. Warren Buffett, everywhere he turns, is benefiting from giving his tax money to the government. So it's a simple matter of he's not entitled to hold on to his earnings because he's benefiting from what the government is doing with everyone's taxed earnings, period.
Who has a reply?
My name is Bettina. I have here in my hand an iPhone, and I have a pen that says Google on it. Both these companies have benefited our lives immeasurably. How many of us have made a Google search today? How many of us used our iPhone or our smartphone to get here? That is worth so much more than the money that Steve Jobs or whomever, Bill Gates, has made in their lives.
Sorry, it's Alana again. I want to say that proves my point because the companies she noted have benefited immeasurably from government support, indirectly, but yes.
How so?
Who forced me to buy an iPhone?
Research and development money for Apple. Google gets tax breaks.
Who forced me to buy an iPhone?
Okay, thank you for that. Let's take the example of roads, which come up again and again. In fact, it was one of the examples that President Obama used when he said, "You didn't build it." Why are Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Michael Jordan and successful people, for that matter, why are we indebted to other people or our fellow citizens who may have had nothing to do themselves with the roads we ride on? Why are we indebted to them such that the successful should have some of their resources transferred to help the less successful?
Hi, my name is Anne, and I would argue that each of us are given so many opportunities. I myself, in getting here to where I am studying, so many people were involved in my education, ensuring that my health and welfare were taken care of, in making sure that the roads were paved so that the school bus could take me to school from South Central Los Angeles. It takes a village, right, they say, to raise a child. Well, it also takes a village to maintain that child in wherever he or she may be. But that shouldn't mean that those people who have been of support in some sort of way should not also reap in some sort of way the benefits, whether they be financial or otherwise, from their success.
All right, so we have two arguments so far that I've heard for redistribution. Anne is emphasizing a kind of general indebtedness to society at large. Roads are sometimes the symbol of that. Important teachers along the way, another symbol, which President Obama referred to when he said, "You didn't build that." So there's the indebtedness argument, and there's the luck argument we heard earlier, that those who are successful aren't wholly responsible for their success, but they enjoyed a lot of luck along the way. So we have the argument from indebtedness, the argument from luck. Are there any other arguments, and then we'll let the libertarians in the room reply, any other arguments in favor of redistribution? Yes?
My name is Peter. I would look back to the economic coercion argument that we were looking at before and say that when the government is redistributing wealth, it's not just saying that Group A is paying for the welfare permanently of Group C. It's saying that the government is providing a guarantee of everyone that you're going to have a minimum standard of living. So if you lose your job, you're not going to starve to death. So it's not saying that Michael Jordan will always pay for people in the lower income to not be poor. It's saying that if Michael Jordan were poor, he would also be provided with that standard. Now, obviously, it's very unlikely that Michael Jordan is really going to be in danger of starvation in the near future. But we also don't say that people who live in areas that have low crime rates don't have to pay for the police because they're not using that service. We're saying that there's a benefit that's provided to everyone in the society, not just a given group in the society by the government, and therefore everyone should pay for that because they are potential beneficiaries of it.
I might need those services if I fall on hard times?
Yes.
But why can't I take out a private insurance policy?
Well, that's the same idea that people have a right to those services, just as you could hire someone to protect you from crime rather than having to pay for everyone to have the police. But we say that everybody has a right to not have certain harms inflicted upon them.
Yes.
My name's Nicole. I'm coming from a purely libertarian standpoint. I don't think that just because Michael Jordan was lucky enough to be born tall means that he's suddenly indebted to every other individual who gives their money with consent to pay for their tickets. I don't think that because he's lucky to have that ability requires that he give away his money.
Well, all right, now let me see if I understand your reply to the luck argument. You're saying, yes, Michael Jordan is lucky to be a gifted basketball player. Sure, he worked hard, but I could work hard, equally hard, and never be as good a basketball player. So yes, there is some luck. But that fact, you're suggesting, does not give society as a whole a claim on his earnings.
Yes, because I think that if we allow a claim on his earnings, then that leads to a very slippery slope in which if we say that we have a claim to the fruits of his labors, which we would be if we're taxing his earnings from his income, then we are also saying that we have a claim over his body and his work, which I don't necessarily think that a lot of people would be able to make that claim. And
all right, let me ask you this, Nicole. It's a powerful argument. Would you say, though, that the luck argument, which you concede about Michael Jordan's talents, let's say, doesn't that undermine the idea that he morally deserves to keep all of the money he makes playing basketball very, very well?
I don't think it undermines it. I think it's almost a corollary. Yes, he was lucky, but I don't think that means that he's suddenly morally obligated to give this up.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, what do you think?
My name is Kevin, and I'd like to pose a question to those who believe that there should be no redistribution. And the question is, given that we live in a society that is highly unequal, and one in which if you're born poor, you're very, very likely to live your entire life poor, what's the moral justification for a society in which so many are so poor and so persistently poor?
Yeah, this is Aaron. How y'all doing?
Speak directly to Kevin.
Kevin, it's pretty simple. I do not want to be forced to give money that I've earned. And I want to address a really important point. Okay, this is fundamental to the principle that the country is founded on. Freedom and protection of specific rights, mainly the right to property, is critical for people. It's important for people in order to pursue happiness and to maximize their happiness. If I work for money, which I go out to buy food, if you take the money from me, then I have less money for food. Therefore, it's harder for me to survive. I might have to work twice as hard or get 3 jobs, to make up for that. So, forget the basic rights. You could always debate about what's basic for survival. That's a gray area. People should be able to keep everything they earn to maximize their happiness. If I want to buy 50 flying saucers, flying cars, if I want to buy trips to space on these new spaceships, I should be able to do that to maximize my happiness. And no one should be able to take any of that from me.
All right, does that address your point, Kevin?
No, in fact, it doesn't address my point. My question was, what is the So we have a system. So we have a system which is enforced by our state, which allows for a great deal of inequality. And so the burden of justification in this conversation has fallen upon redistribution. But if we turn that question around and ask, what is the moral justification for a system that allows for such inequality?
I don't understand that question. Can you rephrase that?
Well, let me.
Somebody else want to speak on that?
All right. Well, I'll give it a try.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Aaron, do you think that there's anything wrong with the inequality that worries Kevin?
Anything wrong with what inequality?
The inequality of income and wealth that's quite pronounced in many societies, and especially this one. Is there anything wrong with that?
Okay, so is there anything wrong with the fact that I have less money than you probably do? Is that what you're saying?
Is there anything wrong with the fact that the top 1% in the United States own more wealth than the bottom 90% put together?
I don't see anything wrong with that, no.
But Kevin, you do.
Yes.
Why?
I think it returns to the issue of what constitutes a free society.
A free society.
Absolutely.
And why does it make the society less free if there are inequalities of income and wealth?
Because I think that it's absolutely clear that without some basic equality, the rights that you have legally cannot be exercised and enjoyed in a way that are consistent with the values which I think in this room we all share, which are a participatory democracy.
All right. I can see there are a lot of hands up, but I want to step back from the discussions on health care and on taxation for redistribution and notice a couple of things about the arguments that we've had. What we've really been having is not only a debate about who built it, but also a debate about the moral legitimacy of the welfare state. Now, the shape of that debate, the underlying philosophical ideas animating it, are different in the U.S. than they are in many European countries. And they're different in ways that I think have been brought out in this discussion. Notice how much of the debate we've just had has focused on competing conceptions of freedom and coercion. Those who oppose universal health care paid by the government, and those who oppose taxation for redistribution, they make a moral argument that that kind of redistribution is at odds with freedom. It's a form of coercion. Those who defend a right to health care, who support redistribution, they invoke a rival notion of freedom. They say we're only free as persons and as citizens if we're not burdened by illness when we can't get health care, or poverty, or lack of education. We're not really free if we lack equality of opportunity. And so much of this debate has been about competing ideas of freedom and coercion. This is a different debate from the one that goes on in much of the world about taxation and redistribution and the welfare state. If you look at the history of American liberalism, one of the striking things is that for the most part, the advances in the American welfare state have been made by liberals. This goes all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s and the New Deal, in the name of the freedom argument. This may seem strange to Europeans who draw typically for their welfare states on stronger notions of social solidarity and the common good. But the first and the sturdiest instrument of the American welfare state, the Social Security system, was enacted by Franklin Roosevelt in 1935, not in the name of the common good, not in the name of the mutual responsibilities of citizens for one another. FDR said at the time, we made it based on payroll contributions, not the income tax, so as to give the contributors a legal, moral, and political right to collect their pensions and their unemployment benefits. With those taxes in there, FDR said, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program. So in many ways, American liberalism and the liberal case for the welfare state has taken its shape in the encounter with libertarian ideas and has based itself largely on the individualist idea of freedom that says, as FDR once said, necessitous men are not free men. In America, it seems, we conduct these debates differently. And so this brings us back to those two quotations from the presidential candidates, from Obama and Romney, with which we began. You didn't build it, said President Obama. And what he seemed to be invoking was the idea of indebtedness and maybe also luck. You relied for your success on all sorts of help that may not be visible, but that matter morally. And yet, it's worth asking a question if we step back from this debate. Is that a persuasive argument? Is that an adequate argument for the welfare state? And does American liberalism pay a price by not articulating and embracing more fully than it does other moral ideas drawn from social solidarity and the common good? I want to thank the audience here at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and thanks to our audience on BBC Radio 4 for listening to this second and final debate in the American edition of our series, The Public Philosopher. Thank you all very much.
The Public Philosopher USA was presented by Professor Michael Sandel and produced by Mukul Devachand. You can join the debate for yourself on the Radio 4 blog. Just go to the BBC Radio 4 website.